Thank you for joining Slated Brother in this in-depth deck tech. My name is Killtrap. My twin and I, Soviet Green, make videos about Magic the Gathering and stuff. Today's deck is a Temur Aggro deck based around prowess. We keep it simple and use our spells to buff and protect our creatures as we bash our opponents' faces in. Most of the creatures in this deck provide interactions that can take advantage of the openings present in a lot of popular meta decks. We utilize Ivy, the Gleeful Spell Thief, to give free copies of all our spells, and sometimes an opponent's if they buff their own creatures. This allows us to focus on our creatures of Valiant or make Elusive Otter unblockable. Maybe even just set her up to be a decent blocker while we swing with our other creatures too. Between the protection that this deck provides and the powerful creatures it produces, this is a great way to shake up your stale aggro gameplay loop. So the first creature on the list is Heartfire Hero. If you're not familiar with this little terror by now, they are a 1-mana red, 1/1, and their Valiant works like a pseudo prowess, giving them a +1/+1 counter when they become the target of a spell or ability that you control. This ability triggers once each turn, but with hexproof spells and combat shenanigans in this deck, that could be both your turn and your opponent's turns easily. Even without Burn Together in your deck, the power they give makes them a hard to handle threat without exile. Next creature is Monastery Swiftspear. A staple red creature in the meta, this 1-mana red 1/2 with haste is always a go-to for prowess decks and a lot of aggro decks just because of their speed and the power they can build up. Emberheart Challenger is the next creature I like to get to. A 2-mana red 2/2 with haste and Valiant, this card is a great form of card advantage to have. Not the most flexible or forgiving in terms of how long we have access to the cards exiled by them, but what's great about having them and Ivy out on the field at the same time is it feels like 2 free cards. Having prowess makes a successful chain of spells that much more potent, even without Ivy on the field. If you think this deck is aggressive enough and could use another creature with potential to get large like Heartfire Hero, or maybe a better source of card advantage, Questing Druid could work as an alternative, but that may only be good in a control-heavy meta or a best-of-3 environment, in my opinion. Ivy the Gleeful Spell Thief, a 2-mana blue and green creature with flying and yet another creature in this prowess deck without prowess. But her gimmick to replicate spells that target a single creature is the reason this deck exists. And it would be cooler if it casts a spell, but it's also kind of nice that it doesn't for certain interactions. Not only will this copy every spell you cast that targets a creature, but if your opponent casts a Monstrous Rage or another spell that targets their creature to buff them up, she gets it as well, which is pretty awesome. The best part of her ability, though, is that it triggers once the spell is cast, and is not cancelled when the spell is countered, or has no viable target, in the case of your original one being murdered, which makes her extremely hard for control decks and mono red aggro decks alike to deal with. The final creature on our list is Elusive Otter, a 1-mana blue 1/1 that doesn't see much play in the standard meta. But as far as prowess creatures go, they have an amazing ability to bring to the table, being unblockable in many situations. Because creatures with power less than Elusive Otter's power cannot block it. Between prowess and the cards coming up, it's pretty easy to be unblockable. As you saw earlier, sometimes it happens pretty early in the game. The Adventure card attached to them works amazingly with creatures in this deck. Grove's Bounty allows you to distribute X +1/+1 counters among your creatures. The Adventure can be used to trigger multiple Valiant sources at once, or as a lump sum of counters on one creature that Ivy can copy onto herself, which is pretty versatile. So our non-creature spells, our buffs, and our protection. First, we have Monstrous Rage, a 1-mana red instant that gives +2 power, along with attaching a monstrous roll token onto your creature, which is an enchantment that gives them +1/+1 and trample. It's hard not to make a red deck with this card in it, especially if you're based around creatures. It's a powerful card. I love it. It's probably one of those controversial meta cards. Next card is Audacity, a 1-mana green enchantment that gives +2 power and trample, which is great for any creature in this deck, along with drawing a card whenever it is put into the graveyard. Casting this with Ivy should grant you a extra card regardless of if things go bad for the original target, or the casting of the spell. Now, Might of the Meek may be a good alternative if you would rather have the card now as opposed to waiting for the creature to be removed, but you lose out on a heavy amount of damage in my opinion. Though it would be pretty easy to trigger the at least +1/+0 with one of these two most of the times being on the field. Our next spell is Felonious Rage. For 1 red mana, we get another source of +2 power, but instead of trample, this gives our creatures haste and can be cast at instant speed. The cool thing about this card is that for the rest of the turn, if the creature targeted by Felonious Rage dies, you get a cute little 2/2 detective token in their place. I usually prefer haste cards like War Squeak that can stop a creature from blocking, but the instant speed interaction is great to have if you hit this after triggering an Emberheart Challenger's Valiant. And this is a form of pseudo protection or recursion if we have to eat removal but still need a body on the field for some combos later on. Shore Up is our next spell. It is a source of protection mainly. For 1 blue mana, we give a creature a humble +1 to both stats, hexproof, and they become untapped. The flexibility of the spell is my reason to pick this card. Having the ability to untap your creature at instant speed is an amazing advantage against any aggro deck. Having the reliable blocker is a key way to hold out against other aggressive decks, or throw off their game and stop them from building up tempo against you. If you're playing against a red deck and you drop this in response to a shock or a lightning strike, as if dodging removal wasn't bad enough for them, we just pulled a blocker out of our ass by untapping the creature. Using this against any aggro deck to take out a threat early on makes it worth using for the hexproof or untap ability alone. And the final spell in this deck is Overprotect. In this removal heavy meta, we need all the protection we can get without taking away from our power. For 2 mana, this green instant grants a creature hexproof and indestructible, along with +3/+3 and trample, which can feel like a huge power play, especially against other aggro decks or a mid-range deck trying to block you. Most aggro decks or mid-range decks have no issues making a trade in combat against another aggro deck if the target would threaten them later on in the game. Indestructible and the extra 3 power help turn the tables on other aggro decks during combat. The Indestructible is especially useful against decks like Rakdos Lizards and Celestia Reds, who can afford to have their creatures stay back and block, or decks that utilize Death Touch. If we don't have Elusive Otter against these decks, they will get enough power to dominate our field, and Overprotect is a great way to put them in check. Since Blue lost the phase-out mechanic in Standard, there's not a lot of protection from exile board wipes like Temporary Lockdown or Sunfall, unless you want to return a creature to your hand or something like that. The Indestructible can at least protect a creature from Brotherhood's End, and the buff of toughness can help your creature push through a black board wipe that takes away from their toughness if needed. In my opinion, Giant Growth would be a good alternative to Overprotect if you wanted to focus on your damage output to end net matches quicker. Sometimes having an instant worth 2 mana can make this deck feel like it's being slowed down in my opinion, even if it is a powerful card like this. Every creature in this deck offers a unique threat to the opponents. Some of them are not common in the meta and are very hard for people to deal with, like Elusive Otter and Ivy, the Gleeful Spell Thief. This deck provides power, speed, card advantage, and card value that other aggro decks cannot provide. We use combat tricks to get the upper hand and slip past other aggro decks. We have enough protection and unique interactions that most control decks will feel ill prepared to handle our combos, unless they're just stacking the heat and drawing 9 removal spells. Even the utility of mid-range decks have no answer to every problem we present on the field. Whether you can copy and paste this for a few quick runs or just use it to make your own brew, I hope this video helps you craft a fun deck either way. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, give the video a like, check out some of the decks we've been making on our channel lately. If you want to see the real-time gameplay footage, check out the other video here and link below showing a short deck tech segment along with the highlights from a stream with this deck. Thank you for watching.